So you might remember earlier this year, a few months ago, I teased that I was working on a special project with a special camera brand. Of course, I am talking about none other than Leica. So Leica is, vastly considered the holy grail of camera manufacturers, known for their film cameras like the Leica M6, their incredibly sharp lenses and great resolution, and also their digital series such as the Q series. A few years back, I was lucky enough to shoot a campaign during International Women's Month for Leica using the Leica Q2. And this year I had the opportunity to fly out to Kosovo with Leica to photograph Sunny Hill Festival using the Leica Q3. As many of you know, my main bread and butter is music photography. It's what I do, week in, week out. I work a lot within electronic music throughout the winter, and then in the summer I do a lot of bigger scaled festivals. And one of the things you have to be really good at when you are working within any kind of fast-paced photography environment, so whether that is event photography, music photography, working on projects where you don't have a massive amount of time with your subject, all of these things really require a level of being able to problem solve. And for this project, the brief that Leica sent me was a crazy creative challenge. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at what that brief was. We're going to look at the challenges that the brief entailed, and also look at how that brief was solved, essentially. I will preface this by saying that Leica made a brilliant film. The team that we went to Kosovo were with me the entire weekend, and they filmed everything about this process. I'm going to be putting some clips up on screen, but I'm also going to be linking it in the description because I would love you guys to go over and check out the film that they made about our experience photographing Sunny Hill Festival with the Leica Q3. I talk a lot about my thoughts in that video too. And in today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about the challenges and how I was able to use the Leica Q3 to solve those challenges. So without saying much more, let's get into it. What was the brief? So the brief that Leica sent me was to photograph a festival, Sunny Hill Festival in Kosovo to be specific, using just this camera, the Leica Q3. So if you don't know about the Leica Q3 is a digital camera. It's this camera that I'm holding right in my hand here, and it has a fixed lens, and this lens is a 28mm lens. So the real challenge comes with shooting a festival, an entire festival, from the atmosphere to the artists with a fixed lens, and quite a wide fixed lens at that. For reference, when I usually shoot music photography, a 28mm is great for those kinds of in-the-moment crowd shots, for any kind of big, wide front of house shots where you're showing off production. It's also great in electronic music where you are in close proximity to the artist. But for those festivals where you might only have pit access, you might only have crowd access, and you still need to get those artist shots, usually I would lean towards something like a 70-200 or some sort of zoom lens that gave me the capability to crop in a lot closer to the artist without being very close to them. So essentially the challenge was using a 28mm lens and making that work for all of the different types of photography you're expected to get when you're shooting a festival. Naturally, I think the 28mm leans in quite nicely to, that crowd engagement sort of thing, lifestyle photography, and we were able to get a series of photos that I really enjoyed from that perspective. One thing I've got to say that made a world of difference though was being able to rock up to a festival with such a small real estate, like having just this camera, you can see how big it is, it's actually tiny, and no other equipment needed was a great luxury. I think it was something that I really enjoyed doing. But of course, I think sometimes when you put certain restrictions on your craft, you are forced to become more creative. And that is definitely something that I felt was apparent throughout this project. A lot of the time in photography, especially in music photography, working in fast-paced environments, a lot of your job is decision making. It's making a decision very quickly based on which equipment or which settings or which way you're going to do something is going to be best in that moment. When you reduce those decisions, when you then only have one camera and one lens to think about, it just takes away some of that pressure. You know what you're working with and you're able to focus on making the best work with what it is you're working with. And that is definitely something I really enjoyed when it came to just using the Leica Q3. My kind of solution to this brief was to just lean into the fact that this is a wide lens and to enjoy what that meant for me experiencing the festival as a normal person would. You know, this sort of camera is something that you probably would be able to get into a festival because it has a fixed lens, it's not a detachable lens. So you could take something like the Leica Q3 into a festival and shoot it from that perspective. It was really fun to put myself into those shoes of experiencing the festival as you would normally and just photographing it from the crowd. And in particular, we had to do that on the first day. So let's talk about the actual festival. Let's talk about what happened, the challenges we faced, and how the Leica Q3 worked in those scenarios. So the festival was a 3-day festival, but we were there for the first 2 days. And the first day was headlined by Lipa. It's her and her family's festival. And the second day was headlined by Shawn Mendes. So on the first day, we really focused a lot on atmosphere, crowd atmosphere, getting those nice crowd shots with the wide lens. The lighting was really lovely. We had a really lovely golden hour, some nice low light, which meant that a lot of the crowd was backlit in a way that looked quite ethereal. And if you guys have seen any of my festival photography, or actually any of my natural light portrait photography, you'll know that I love a little bit of side lighting, I love a little bit of backlighting when it comes to golden hour. Of course, in this scenario, the Q3 was perfect for this. It's small enough that it doesn't get in your way. The 28mm lens is kind of perfect for that kind of photography. And we were able to just roam the festival and photograph it from the crowd, you know, photographing the crowd and photographing the perspective of the stage from the crowd. The biggest challenge came in photographing the artists. So for this day, we had pit access, but the pit was not what you would ordinarily think of a pit to be. So from my experience, the pit is usually the area between the barricade at the front of the crowd and the stage. But for this festival, the pit was a lot further away. So if we have the stage here and the crowd is coming this way, the pit was actually at the side. So what that meant was I was a lot further away from the artists than what we had anticipated and planned for. If I had been using a focal length that was a lot more cropped in, we might have, you know, had a better chance of getting interesting photos from that spot, but we kind of identified very quickly that maybe that wasn't the best place to be stood when we had a 28mm lens. And so we were able to get right into the crowd. There was a stage, which is your main stage, and then a B stage further into the crowd. And my thought process was, if we use this pit to get into the crowd kind of quite close to the front and then walk backwards on ourselves, kind of towards all the people, they'll let us through because we're not walking towards the stage, we're walking backwards. And that way we can try and do it at like an angle that gets us as close to the B stage as possible. So we ended up managing to get maybe like 4 or 5 lines behind the front of the B stage, which meant that we were able to capture some great wide stuff using the Leica Q3, using the 28mm. Something that the Leica Q3 is really great for is the resolution, and it has this thing called digital zoom, which essentially gives you frame lines up to the equivalent of like a 90mm lens to help you frame for that crop. And the resolution means that you are able to crop in, you know, as far as 90mm without losing a ton of detail. Of course, you don't have the same compression, the same behaviors as a 90mm lens, but you are able to get those really detailed crops. And this was a real lifesaver. Like, honestly, this is something that I've never experienced with any other camera. The ability to be able to crop to such an extent and still have usable images is something that I've never been able to do before. And that meant that we were able to essentially utilize this camera as a 28mm lens, but also, you know, a 35, I think it's 70, and then a 90. I'm just checking now, it was a 28, a 35, 50, a 75 and a 90. So you were able to use all of those different intervals of frame lines. And then when you import it into Lightroom, then essentially what it does then is it gives you the full image, but it also gives you like the crop using your frame lines, but you can kind of readjust the crop in post. So this was actually a really great feature of the Q3 that I didn't know about even before using it for this project, and something that really came in handy for the challenges that we were experiencing. On day 2, things were a little bit different. We were able to get access to the actual pit, so the pit that is between the barricade of the front of the crowd and the stage, which of course meant that we were a lot closer to the artists. And I was able to use the lens truly as a 28mm lens to get those shots as the artist was coming towards the end of the stage, as the artist was coming towards the end of the catwalk, and then use that in unison with the cropping features to be able to create an array of images from the pit that also really showed off like the performances from the artists throughout the day. There's a lot of things that I like about the Q3, but I think the 2 things that make it, actually 3 things, I'm going to say 3 things that make this a really good camera for festival photography, for music photography. The first one is the size, how easy it is to hold, you know, how it feels in your hands. The second thing is actually the aperture dial on the lens. So this aperture dial is on the lens, obviously because it's a fixed lens, it's the only lens on here and it has an aperture dial. I think that this is a very useful feature when it comes to live music photography, because there are a lot of times in live music photography where exposures will change very quickly. You know, lighting design changes, production changes, you might have pyro, for example, and you need to change your exposure quickly. Having a tool like this, such as an aperture dial that you can move very easily whilst you're holding the camera, is a great way to quickly change your exposure without having to kind of like, you know, tap into different settings on the camera and maybe miss the moment. So that one is definitely something that I really think works well in this scenario of using it in music photography. And thirdly, the cropping feature. Honestly, I'm going to put on screen the photos that I took, the kind of like the width of them, like the full photo, and then the crop. So you guys can see what I mean and how good this camera is in terms of cropping and how high this resolution is. Photographing an entire festival using a fixed 28mm lens is not something that I had on the cards for 2025. Honestly, it's not something that I'd ever really considered, but it was something that was made so much fun because of the camera, because of the team I was working with, and the situation we were in, where I was truly just able to explore how best to use this camera in this setting. I want to give a massive thank you to the whole team at Leica Germany and Leica UK for making this possible, for bringing me on board and trusting me with this project, and also to the team, Nicholas, Tim, Patrick, Mira. I'm going to link the production team in the description as well, because the video that they made happen and the way that they were able to facilitate throughout this project was so brilliant. And please do head over and check out the video because it was such an honour to be a part of such an amazing project. Also, a big thank you to Sunny Hill Festival for letting us come in and photograph the festival and giving us the access that you did give us. It was such a brilliant experience and I really love the photos that we were able to capture from this experience. So thank you guys for watching. Head over and check out the video on the Leica channel, which will be linked in the description. Let me know what you think and I will see you guys in the next one.